Some brands offer you low finance, or cashback, or servicing.
Renault don't do ors. We do ands. The Renault Kadjar with 1.91% APR and €1,000 cashback and 3-year servicing, saving you thousands. Renault, the brand with the and. Visit your local Renault dealer. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement. Terms and conditions apply. Deposit required subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
No risk it, no biscuit.
Coming from the Arizona desert, presented by SBNation.com. For Arizona Cardinals fans, by Arizona Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider's perspective, this is Revenge of the Birds. Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. This is Revenge of the Birds Radio, and I'm your host, Jess Root. Thank you for listening, whether it be live, whether it be via download, however it is that you are listening to the program tonight, whenever that is, we thank you for making a part of your day. And today we are going to be talking about Daryl Washington. We have just finished OTAs, organized team activities. The voluntary part of the off-season is now complete. And so we have now, schedule-wise, next week we'll have the mandatory mini camp where the players will put on pads. They will have 3 days of workouts and drills and practice. And then they're going to be off. We're going to hit the quiet part of the off-season. The draft's done. Free agency's essentially done. OTAs are done. Off-season workout programs are done. Mini camps are done. And then we're going to be left with about 5 weeks or so, 5-6 weeks until training camp begins. We don't have official start on that. But basically the big news is we're not going to talk about so much about training camp or OTAs or positional battles. We'll save that for another week probably, so after we've had mini camp probably. And we're going to talk about Daryl Washington tonight. And joining us on Revenge of the Birds Radio is Seth Cox. How are you doing tonight, Seth?
I'm good, Jeff. How are you?
Doing great. Glad to have you as on. Again, if you would like to call in, if you are listening live, of course, give us a call at 646-478-3787. Again, that's 646-478-3787. You can call in, give us your take on Daryl Washington and what the Cardinals are doing, should have done, what the league is doing, the implications that we're going to see on the field, off the field, even future draft plans, or even talk hindsight. We can go back and play Monday morning quarterback. That's what this program is for, to talk, to speculate, to analyze, and all that. And this is brought to you, this show, and this segment of the show is brought to you by Audible.com, the site where you can find over 100,000 audio downloads, audio books, audio recordings. And you can join. You can actually get your free audiobook downloaded for free by testing it out. Hit audibletrial.com/Revenge of the Birds. Again, that's audibletrial.com/Revenge of the Birds, where you can sign up, give it a test run at audible.com, and get yourself a free audiobook download. The news broke down. We knew that Daryl Washington was already in trouble. He had a guilty plea for his domestic violence case, for his aggravated assault charge, and it was pleaded down to a felony 6. It agreed to no jail time and it would be reduced to a misdemeanor after a year of supervised probation. We had already been worried about what the league was going to do. Seth Cox on the line now speculated, based on the history, that he would probably see around an 8-game suspension. We hadn't heard anything, despite the speculation that some people were saying, 1 to 2 games, 3-4 games, being the felony plea that it was. And then Saturday came, and Mike Jurecki broke the news on Twitter, saying that he was hearing that, well, first, he was the one saying he was hearing, as well, when some of our listeners love this, he was hearing, rather than actually reporting it, as a sure thing. He just puts it out there as information that he's hearing, that it was going to be longer than people suspect. Then the news broke on Saturday that, in fact, Daryl Washington was suspended for the full season, for the 2014 season. And, well, guess what? People initially reacted like, wow, the NFL's taking a hardline stance. Is it fair? Is it unfair? Thinking it was related to his personal conduct policy. Then we got the news later that day as the league and the Cardinals announced themselves that it was a suspension for at least a year under the NFL substance abuse policy, or substances of abuse policy. I don't know how it's worded exactly like that, but he was, he's already in the deepest stage of the program. He already was suspended last season for 4 games under the same policy. Obviously, there's some issue there. He, in his statement, Daryl Washington, came out and said that it had to do with marijuana, which honestly probably doesn't surprise anyone when anyone talks about marijuana. But the fact that it came after he was already suspended, he's now suspended for the entire season for 1 calendar year. And there is no guarantee that he will get back right away, as he's now subject to intense testing, frequent testing. It's kind of the same situation as Tyrann Mathieu is in as he entered the league, able to be tested up to 10 times a month. I don't know if anyone actually is tested 10 times a month. That's a lot. But then he's going to have to go through a reinstatement process. And never mind, once that is done, the league still has not addressed the whole personal conduct policy dealing with his aggravated assault charge. Now, of course, by then, things may be a little lighter because of that, but by the time it's happened, he could talk about it. This may actually be a misdemeanor, and there won't be as much to talk about. But you're listening on Saturday, whether it's on Twitter, whether you're listening to something on the radio, the news. Seth, what were your initial reactions when you heard the suspension? First, when you heard it was the year-long suspension. Second, when it was not the personal conduct, that it wasn't his legal issues, but it was the substance abuse policy. What were your initial reactions to that?
My initial reaction was good for the NFL. I mean, bad for the Cardinals, obviously, but good for the NFL. I mean, we've made a mockery of the Ray Rice, Josh Gordon situation while it was, unfolding. And, Ray Rice is only going to get, 3 or 4 games, and Josh Gordon's going to be suspended for the season for smoking weed again. And, it's okay to beat your wife, but it's not okay to smoke a little pot. And so, this came out, and everybody was, Cardinals fans were obviously very upset, but everybody was like, wow, the NFL's going to take a hardline stance. They're going to draw a line in the sand finally. The way it was presented about, and then confirmed a little later that he was going to be suspended for the entire year, it was presented as, this is his suspension for the domestic violence thing. I don't know. That's the way I guess everybody took it, and that's the way it was presented, on Twitter, unfortunately, is that this was from the domestic violence case, not necessarily we didn't know about the drug situation yet. Then when it came out that it was another, drug violation or substance abuse violation, it kind of made me laugh. I mean, honestly, that's all I could do at that point was laugh at the idea that this guy can't stop for a minute. His NFL career is maybe another 5, hopefully 10 years, and then he's got the rest of his life to, smoke as much weed as he wants. And he'll have the money to buy as much weed as he wants. He can't, wait that 5 to 10 years while he's in the NFL, while he knows he's going to be tested all the time because he's already in the program. It was just a silly situation, and it makes me laugh because, whether you're, pro legalizing weed or con or whatever, against it, the reality of the situation is, even if it's legal, if your employer tells you can't do it, you can't do it. And if you get caught, you get fired. Well, he was basically fired for a year now. and he'll have to figure it out after that. It's not legal in Arizona. It's not legal across the country still, but I know a lot of people that, it's just weed, who cares? It's the law. If in my line of work, and I'm pretty sure in your line of work as a teacher as well, if you come to school and, you tied one on last night and got really drunk, and then you have to take a urine test the next day and alcohol shows up, guess what? I'm going to get fired from my job. So that's the way it works. It's not, it's not because alcohol is illegal. It's because it's in your system while you're at work. And that's how, that's how those random drug tests work. So it's just an unfortunate situation. But
and for me, it was, I was surprised. I was honestly almost shocked at, initially I thought it was dealing with I wondered when I heard it was a full year. I'm like, wait, that doesn't seem right. So I did initially think that it was stemming from his felony plea, his aggravated assault charge. And then I said, that doesn't make sense. The research you had done and written said, okay, 8 games, that sometimes getting reduced, 6 games, 8 games. It didn't make sense to me at all that it was a year. I'm like, okay, where's the precedent for that? Thinking, well, maybe there's something else. And then there was a little bit of speculation that it was drug-related. And then it made sense. It made sense. And I couldn't be too upset. I mean, it doesn't affect me personally in my daily life as a sports fan. Yes, it puts the Cardinals in a bit of a bind. But all I can do is just shake my head and say, oh, my goodness, like, really? and that's beside my personal, that's even regardless of how I feel personally towards any sort of substance, whether it be alcohol, whether it be drugs, illegal drugs, marijuana. Just really, you're throwing your career away. A guy with such insane talent. And then it actually got me thinking about something that I talked to you about here on the radio show, and never got around to actually posing the question in writing. But it's something that we should actually throw out there. I think, how the substance abuse policy works. There's really no gray area except in the appeals process. That drug program, the substance abuse policy, has been set in stone for quite some time. And while someone might say it's in fact that, hey, it's just smoking weed, that's really harsh. You get fired for a year, so he's losing millions of dollars, or essentially he's being frozen, not getting paid through that time. He might have to give up some of that bonus money he was given. It takes a lot to get to the point where he's at. It's not the case of there's one positive drug test and then you're suspended for the year. There is a long, drawn-out process now. I believe he entered the league in the program. I can't remember for sure because of things that happened prior to his entering the draft. But to get where it's at, it takes quite some time. And when you have a system as such where you have incremental steps, then yes, it has to be it has to be punitive. Otherwise, there's no point to having the policy as far as many times as it takes to get to this point. I couldn't believe it. As talented a player as Washington is, it just made it. And I wasn't outraged as many fans are there, but they're outraged at. It's almost funny that the whole thing is the drug thing has swept under the rug. Has kind of swept under the rug the whole domestic abuse thing, the whole aggravated assault, but I will admit is very much it's on the serious scale. It is far outweighs what he's getting suspended for. However, the outrage I understand because it was out of the blue, and the fact that it's been an issue in the past. So it's out of the blue. People are upset. I get that. And for me, I just don't understand. He's throwing it, and he's putting the team in a bad thing. The team came out very strongly, but it wasn't that strong. Steve Keim's statement, it's unacceptable. We're disappointed. But honestly, what else could the team say? Well, he was suspended. We're okay with it. Of course they're disappointed. They paid him a lot of money, and now they don't get his services on the field. They know he's a key, important player. They let a very a quality, productive player from last year go because they already had Washington on one side, and they had the second-year player they drafted on the other. The teammates have been kind of the same thing, and I'll tell you from a little bit of perspective on the insider, this couldn't have happened at better time for Arizona in terms of managing the situation. The statement was released on a Saturday. No press release, no media access, so they controlled everything. It broke on a weekend. Then they had OTAs. Monday they had press access, but it's limited press access. So for OTAs, the media does not get to go into the locker room after practice, as is customary, or before or after practice, which is customary during the regular season. A couple of practices are open during the week. You can talk to players as they come off the field, and then Bruce Arians will speak. And they crafted it really well. Bruce Arians, in some cases, will wait to address the media until the players have come off the field. But on Monday, very cleverly done, Bruce Arians was almost at the front. He started addressing the media first, before the players even all left the field. So any media who wanted to get the official statement from the Cardinals, from the coach, they had to be there. Players all get to walk by. They don't have to address it. He says, no more talking about after Washington today. Carson Palmer talked. Lorenzo Alexander talked. But really, the Cardinals controlled that situation really well. It's early in the offseason, so they can bring someone else in. It was really fortunate for their parts, but we can't really do much more. We can't talk about it anymore. And they really shut things down. They towed the company line. Lorenzo Alexander even referred to Steve Keim's statement. Lorenzo Alexander, veteran linebacker, talked to me. He said, I think Steve Keim said it best when he said it in his statement. And how should the team react? They should be disappointed, but go, okay, we have to move on. Carson Palmer said it doesn't matter if we're disappointed or not. He just kind of skirted the question. It doesn't matter if we're disappointed. We have to move on. How do you think that? If you were a teammate, would you be upset? Would you be upset at the league? Would you be, especially the young player, you got these younger players at the position who now have an opportunity. How should the teammates feel at this point?
I think the veterans, Darnell, Larry, Carson, they should feel kind of betrayed because this is a guy that, the team's counting on, and not just counting on from the sense of, he's a veteran, he's a leader, from the sense that, he's one of the best linebackers in the NFL, and as you said, they let a quality player leave under the assumption that they're going to have Daryl Washington and Kevin Minter, in the middle, and then he goes and, screws it up. So I think they feel betrayed. I think the younger guys just look at it as it's probably good for the younger guys to see it actually happen to a teammate, especially a teammate that's this good. And it'll depend, obviously, what the Cardinals do next, whether or not they end up cutting him or, they're obviously not going to cut him this year because of the cap ramifications, but whatever they decide to do, I think it'll send a message to the young guys. You don't want to single out Tyrann Mathieu, but it'll just send the message that, hey, this is serious. The league will do their part and suspend you, but also we're going to do our part and we're going to get rid of you, and you're not going to be a part of this organization. We're not going to kind of stand behind you when you get to this point where we can't, count on you to be a productive teammate.
Looking to the future, assuming, now granted this is something we have to look forward to, Cardinals aren't going to count money-wise. It doesn't make any sense because basically what's happened, they've recouped his salary cap space. It's like everything is deferred a year. So his year of his contract, it doesn't happen. It doesn't start again until he gets back. Basically everything's pushed back. And apparently they crafted the $10 million bonus in a fashion. He was due to make a $10 million option bonus in March that they agreed to pay, but apparently they worked it where they paid $5 million this year and $5 million the next perhaps, I think it was one report, it was $2.5 million in March, another $2.5 million later this year, and then the rest of that next year. Cutting him now, they can't recoup now. So they basically are going to be able to get out of paying him if they want. Should the Cardinals, if and when he's reinstated, should he ever play for the Cardinals again, and will he? The two separate questions, obviously. In your opinion, should he ever play again for the Cardinals, and will he ever play again for the Cardinals?
Should he, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, but no. And not because, what he did or anything like that. It's just because obviously he has an issue and he can't be counted on to take care of himself and, be trusted to be a teammate. It's not just, the like you said, the year-long suspension. He's got another pending litigation coming when he comes back. At this point, it's just hard to count on him. So for me, personally, I don't want a guy on my team that I can't count on. That's just me. That's just the way I look at it. Will he? I honestly just think it depends on what happens this year. If they take a giant step back, and I'm not saying they will, but I'm saying if they do take a giant step back, maybe they cut him and say, look, you screwed us so much that we, fell back from a 10-6 team to a 7-9 team or a 6-10 team, and we can't have that on this team anymore. If they're close still and they think, okay, well, he can put us over the hump, we know what he can do on the field, and if he's not on the field, if he screws up again, well, we know we're okay still. And we don't have to invest money in an inside linebacker, another inside linebacker, or invest a high draft pick in another inside linebacker. So I think that's going to be how they play it on will he. If they're good, I think he's back. If they're bad, they're going to look to replace him and not have to count on him anymore.
And on my take, I'm gonna answer the will he. I don't think he will. I think, given the situation over the past two seasons, with everything that's happened, first the substance abuse suspension, and the whole legal situation, and the second suspension, and the pending suspension that is yet waiting for him, I don't think they will. I mean, knowing the Cardinals is still a family organization, the Bidwell still, I know it's different than it has been, but I still think that thing sort of matters to the team on the whole. I don't think they will put up with that, being that he's let them down multiple times. They gave him a chance. First of all, they took a chance on him coming out of college, as he had some issues there while he was at TCU. I believe it was a robbery he was part of, and TCU has been known now for some time with the drug culture there that's been an issue. So they took a chance on him to begin with. He turned to be very productive. He was already in the program, so that there was stuff that we already knew about, that the team already knew about, that is. So I think the will, I don't think he will. And second part, I don't think he should either, for multiple reasons. One, for a guy like Tyrann Mathieu who's come into the league already and basically in the same situation as Daryl Washington is in now, he's got a very hard-line stance. You fail any drug test, guess what? You will get no more of that guaranteed money. None. They have to play it consistent. You're in the same kind of situation. You can't count on him. He has already failed you twice, 3 times. I don't think he should. And in case of, for public relations, someone will give him a second chance, and it will be. And if he performs, it's a redemption story. They are kind of like Tyrann Mathieu. He had his issues at LSU. He was kicked off the team. The Cardinals drafting him, it's a great story. If the Cardinals bring him back, they're enabling him. From a public relation, they are enabling Washington if they let him back again after that. And so there's no way for them to win with him. They are enabling him. They are setting themselves to be cheated upon again, to be let down, to be disappointed. And so, no, they shouldn't. And which is a bummer and money thing, because if he gets his life under control, or at least if he can control that part of his life, he's going to come back and still be a dynamic playmaker for someone, and that will be disappointing for Cardinals fans. But that isn't the storyline that we need to have for the Cardinals, because the same situation, he'll need a change of scenery. He'll need a new set of accountability, and then that redemption story will have to happen elsewhere. This is Revenge of the Birds Radio. Seth Cox is on the line. I'm Jess Root. If you want to give us a call, weigh in on the Daryl Washington situation. If you are listening to us live, again, that phone number is 646-478-3787. If you're not on the phone live, if you're not on the line, if you're not listening to us live, but rather through via download, whether it be on the Blog Talk Radio site, we're already under the Revenge of the Birds, where the show will be posted, or you're listening via podcast download through iTunes or Stitcher Radio. If you would head on over on Twitter, our Facebook page, or on RevengeOfTheBirds.com, you can join us on the conversation. And Revenge of the Birds Radio is brought to you in part by FanDuel.com. If you're football fans, as you guys are, you play fantasy football. However, the off season, you may want to get your fantasy fix, and fantasy baseball is another big sport. FanDuel is the biggest and most successful one-day fantasy baseball league. You can play today and win tonight. There's no season-long commitment. There's no upfront fees. You can win. There's real money, up to starting from $1 to $1,000. You can do a new team every day. You only have to play when you want, and there's going to be more than $400 million in payouts. And you can try it out. In fact, there's a deal. If you go to FanDuel.com and use the code BIRDS, just like Revenge of the Birds, use the code BIRDS to sign up, and that first deposit that you make, up to $200, will be matched by FanDuel. So you essentially are losing nothing to try it out. So up to $200, they will match. Play the game, win some cash, play again if you want, win some more cash. Again, that's FanDuel.com. We're using my code BIRDS, FANDUEL.com, the leader in one-day fantasy baseball. We're going to play some Monday morning quarterback. We're going to talk 2020 hindsight. And this is a topic we briefly mentioned in one of our shows a while back. I can't remember if it was the free agency show, the pre-free agency show, or the draft. And I posed you this question, knowing it was about the whole Daryl Washington legal situation, knowing that Karlos Dansby was coming up for free agency, and I asked you the question, should the Cardinals consider just cutting Daryl Washington because of that big bonus he was due, because of his unreliability, because there's a little bit of unknown on whether you can count on him, and then using that money to pay Karlos Dansby? Yes, he's older. You can't look too far in the future. You can't look for more than a year or two, maybe three in the future, and I still thought that Karlos Dansby has 2 or 3 very good seasons left. Knowing the position, the way he keeps himself in shape, he's a smart player, he's still fast. And instead of pairing Washington, you still have Kevin Minter on one side, use Karlos Dansby on the other, and you avoid all of this mess of the PR fiasco, the whole scandal of the drugs, anything that's involved. And I threw that out there. Would that have been? I mean, that would have been a pretty ballsy move on the team's pound. And in hindsight, maybe it was the right move. Some saying no, it wasn't the right move. I'll tell you this: from the team's perspective, I already know this. They were ready to let Karlos Dansby leave, based on what Bruce Arians said the other day. They already had Kevin Minter penciled in as a starter for this year. They already did. That's why they made the decision to let Karlos Dansby go. Obviously, Dansby would have come back under the right contract, but it sounded like they knew Karlos was moving on as a front office. It kind of made it sound that way. So, if you were Steve Keim, if you were going to go back to January, if you're Steve Keim, if you're Bruce Arians, if you could have foreseen anything of this sort, and they had to have been able to foresee it a little bit, they had to have been able to foresee the possibility at least. Would you now wish you had cut Washington before and use that money to keep Dansby around. Team him with Kevin Minter, who, by the way, a young player. Dansby is a great leader. Dansby is a fantastic leader, fantastic prep. He works extremely hard in practice. He's a great guy to have in the locker room. And then roll with that lineup for a year or two, trying to make that Super Bowl run. Would that have been something you would have done?
I think I talked about this on Twitter the other day. I think it would have been obviously the right move in hindsight, because you know what you're getting from Dansby as opposed to having two unknowns now at inside linebacker. So you go in and you look at what the defense was without Washington, but with Dansby, they're still very good. Everybody wants to say, oh, well, they were without Washington in the first 4 games of the season. They finished 2-2. Sean Church had some great stats on. I think they were still the 3rd or 7th or something like that. Still top 10 in rushing defense and things of that nature. But again, you have Karlos Dansby. You're replacing him with Kevin Minter, who, should be a nice ball player, should be a very good ball player, and Larry Foote, who is 34. And I honestly don't even remember where he played last year. Was he in Detroit last year, or was he back in Pittsburgh?
Oh, yeah, he was back in Pittsburgh. He played 3 quarters before he ruptured his bicep.
Right. So, it's not like we're talking about a guy that has done much in the last 2 or 3 years. A lot of people like to point to, Dansby was the same type of thing. Well, Dansby was still very productive for the Dolphins. Larry Foote was not, and not even looking at last year. You go back to 2002, he wasn't productive for the Lions, and I believe that's where he was at, was with Detroit.
Statistically, he was. I don't impact because he had I think 112 tackles. He had 4 sacks, a couple forced fumbles. He was productive in 2012. I don't know how impactful that was looking at the defense as a whole. He did have numbers though.
Yeah, he had nice numbers, but you look at that Detroit team, and it's just frustrating because you look at what you had and how close you were, and I know we talk a lot about the secondary and the defensive line, and we'll be okay with the linebackers now, but the way Todd schemed the defense last year, it was for the inside linebackers to be the playmakers, for them to make plays all over the field. Now he has to re-scheme the whole defense, or you're going to have 2 lesser players trying to make the same plays that 2 guys that are, rangy, athletic, inside backers, making those plays. So it's just a difficult situation. I would have, obviously, knowing what you know now, you wish they would have cut Daryl and used that money on Karlos and had less turnover at the position, because that's what you want. It's just less turnover at that position.
And I was under the same impression. I threw it out there because I thought it might have been a good idea, especially with what we knew. If the Cardinals were trying to make a run right now, having Karlos Dansby on that field makes a difference. I'm not sure which is a better combination. Is it Daryl Washington with Kevin Minter? Is it Daryl Washington? Is it Karlos Dansby with Kevin Minter? And I think the best way would have been to have Dansby and Washington on the same field. And I was on the record as saying I wanted the Cardinals. I felt that they needed to do that, they're trying to make a run right now, that they couldn't let that dynamic playmaker go. And granted, they weren't going to pay him the 4 years and $24 million. I thought they should have paid him 2 years and $16 million. And I think he would have stayed for it. I don't know, but I think had they made that offer early, he would have been signed. And I think you can push back Kevin Minter another year or two. That's fine. And then in light of all this mess, you'd still have Dansby and Minter. And so you wouldn't be in a bad situation. Now they've got to revamp things. But would have been the right thing? I thought, even before this came out, I thought that wasn't a bad idea. And I didn't want Dansby to leave anyway. I think he will be an impact player in Cleveland. I don't think the Cardinals will their defense will take a huge step back, but I think they will take a step back without Dansby because of not only because of his still very athletic, his playmaking ability, because he's so smart and he's so hardworking, and his leadership, in fact, he likes to toot his own horn, I get it, but what he said was the truth. His work ethic helped lift the work ethic of the other players in that locker room, and look at that the defense did. They were fantastic. Which brings us to the next question. Go ahead.
Real quick, though, as you said, you don't foresee them taking a big step back, I think is how you worded it. But the thing is, we don't know what Minter even is at this point. Mike Jurecki can tweet out all the gushing tweets about Arians saying these things and this sort of, this and that. But the reality of the situation is we have no idea what he is as a player in the NFL. We know what he was.
And mind you, this
college.
Is the words that Bruce Arians himself said. If Minter had been thrown on the field last year, he probably would have failed. He's used the word probably would have failed. He used the word lost to describe Minter in his first season. He had a hard time adjusting. Now, granted, the same thing happened his freshman year at LSU, and then when he was given a bigger responsibility as his sophomore year, he flourished. But this is a player. Now, I'm very high on him. The coaching staff obviously thinks he's ready and will be another great player. But you've got the combination of guy who was, one, he was lost, and his coach said he was lucky that he didn't have to go on the field because he probably would have failed a season ago. So I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah, and that's just what concerns me because, everybody, and I understand this is the time of year for optimism and rose-colored glasses and those types of things. But you look at it, you're expecting basically two rookies to man two very important positions in Todd Bowles' defense in Kevin Minter and Dale Buchanan. Then you're expecting a guy coming off a hip problem in Antonio Cromartie to play really, back to the level he played at 2 years ago. Then you're expecting another guy coming off an ACL surgery to be as good as he was last year before the ACL surgery. That's a lot to expect out of rookies and, previously injured players. And that's where my concern comes in when people just, kind of brush off the idea that, it's no big deal. It's just, you're losing both your inside linebackers. No big deal. But it's like, you look at the scheme that, Coach Bowles used, and that was kind of the heart and soul of the defense, was their inside linebackers and opening those guys up to make plays all over the field.
Moving to the next topic, and this is one that's a little bit more fun to deal with because we deal with knowing the whole issue of a little bit. This is actually a conversation I had with one of my colleagues in the media, off the record, of course. This is a sideline conversation during practice. Very interesting insight that I hadn't thought about because of how unreliable Daryl Washington is. And everyone seems to point to the whole marijuana is more and more acceptable. Why is he getting punished a whole year? Isn't that acceptable for just smoking marijuana like it's no big deal? The only reason we know, or know, with air quotes, know that this is a marijuana issue is because of Washington's statement. Washington has thus far shown not to be a very reliable source about truthful, reliable, whatever. How do we know that's the drug that he had an issue? Maybe it's cocaine. I'm not saying that it was, but he's the one who put that in, who put the word marijuana out there. No one else. Washington himself. He doesn't make for the best source of reliability. It might not be that. We don't know. So that's the first thing. So that's a different story if he's using heavier, more problematic drugs, heroin, crack, cocaine, whatever. But society seems to be saying, there's a vocal part of society that says smoking marijuana is no big deal. When it comes to the NFL, should it even be an issue? Should that be part of the substance abuse? Obviously, it's in there, but should it be? should the league be testing for marijuana? Should players be suspended for it? If we're talking more on a moralistic level.
Right, and I kind of talked about this earlier, but if your employer says that you can't do something and you do it anyways, then if you get caught, you get in trouble, and that's kind of what this boils down to. I know companies that don't even allow their employees to have Twitters, or Facebook pages, and yet I know people within that company that have a Twitter feed, and they have it under a pseudonym and are basically anonymous to who they really are. But guess what? If they get caught, they're going to get fired. So, and what are we going to say about that company? Are we going to say, well, it's just Twitter? It's not like they're doing anything illegal. Well, the reality is your place of employment, the place that pays you whatever he was going to make this year, $6.25 million, I think, is what the total number is going to be. Is saying that it is, that you are not allowed to smoke weed. If that's what he did, like you said, you're not allowed to smoke weed. And he's decided that I don't care. I'm going to do it because I want to do it. And if that's the case, it's just like anything else you do at work. If your boss gives you a directive and you just disregard it and disobey it, you're going to be fired, whether or not it's illegal or immoral or whatever other thing you want to put on it. The reality is it's against what your work asked you to do, and that's why in the end, I don't feel bad for him, no matter what your stance is on the whole legalizing of marijuana thing.
Do you think that, aside from what it is, do you think the NFL should even test for it?
Because it's illegal throughout the country except for 2 states, I think they have to. There's really, I just don't think you can. I don't think you can say, well, professional NFL, professional football players need to be allowed to smoke weed if they need to. If you want to make the case that if they have medical cards and they can go get it for medicinal purposes, then you know what? As long as they have their medical card, that's just like your get out of jail free card basically at work too. So, do that. But until it's a legal substance throughout the country and, it's allowed to happen anywhere, I think it has to be illegal because that's the reality of the business. I think it was Vince Marotta and Dan Bickley were talking about it the other day. What if a Denver Bronco, it's legal in Colorado. So what if a Denver Bronco is in Kansas City and, it has a joint and gets pulled over? What is he going to tell the officer? Well, it's legal where I'm from, so it's okay. It doesn't work that way. Even if it's legal in the NFL, it's illegal in Kansas City, so he can't have it.
And to the point of society, I don't know. I know based on social media, based on news broadcasts, which don't always necessarily express or talk about what the majority say, yes, marijuana is more and more acceptable, and people are beginning to look at it in a different light. I hear on the radio, maybe 20 years from now, that people look back and say, what? You guys, people used to go to jail for marijuana? I don't know. The fact remains, it's still not all completely acceptable. Like you said, it's illegal in 48 states. And there's of course there's the issue of there's a process in place. Now, granted, and I'm going to point to this, the reason why Daryl Washington's suspension is so severe isn't because he smoked weed. It's because he continues to have abuse a substance, use a forbidden substance, and has continued to go against that policy. It wasn't he got caught once, suspended for a year. It is everything leading up over the past 5 years led to this year's suspension, and which I think is completely just. I don't even compare. Like we take the Ray Rice situation. I don't equate the two. Ray Rice, what he did is much worse as an isolated event, but based on what we know, it is a singular event. And honestly, people can understand losing their temper. No, we should never condone, nor do I excuse what Ray Rice did. However, people screw up once. Usually it's after, usually there's a history of that. However, but if one isolated event, I can understand suspending him 1, 2, 3, 4 games based on a singular event. Daryl Washington's had this issue now. This is going through 5 years of a problem that has continued on in a policy, in a program that is very defined as to what happens if you continue to have problems, and it escalates, and it escalates, and it escalates, and it escalates. So I don't compare the two. Now, should they continue to test for it? Personally, I think they should. As for anything else, that I disagree with the whole, well, doesn't mean this is necessary. But my personal views are different when it comes to alcohol. And so while they are legal, why isn't marijuana legal, which has less physical addictive properties, or no physical addictive properties, as many say? The fact is, an NFL team the NFL still has to look at it. It is still a business. And there's an angle I haven't really heard much spoken of, and that is this one. As a business where you have paying fans, if they look at marijuana smoking still if they look at it at some point and say it's acceptable, I think there still is an image issue. That there will be fans who say, I can't support this. They won't pay, they won't buy paraphernalia, they won't buy jerseys, they won't pay to watch football games if they feel that their players, they're just a bunch of stoners. I think there's that portion that you have to, because I don't think the league believes it is as widespreadly accepted as people say it is. And so for that reason, because they have an image to uphold still, at least on the drug side, they still need to maintain that hardline stance of we don't accept this. Now,
yeah, and I agree with you. Like, that's until it's a legal entity, like I said, until it's something that you can do throughout the country, and that's just kind of how it goes. I was going to say something real quick. I used to work for a company that was in charge of getting prescription medication for a lot of pro teams, spring training, things of that nature. And what people don't get is it's not like an athlete can pop in to an urgent care, pick up a script for Percocet, and then go pick it up at the corner drugstore. That's not how it works in professional sports. That a lot of times, it has to come from a team doctor, and it has to come from a specific pharmacy. And if they can't, if the pharmacy doesn't have it, then there's exceptions and there's rules and there's things of that nature. But we had to keep a roster of basically everything that the guys were on in case they popped for a test. That way we could provide the information if needed. And that's what people don't get is it's not like, people talk about the Percocets and things of that nature, and I know it's a problem at the NFL level, and I can tell you that from firsthand that it's a problem, but, they all had prescriptions for it. They all had the legal stuff for it. I'm not saying that they didn't take extra stuff or get extra stuff, but they still were able to show that they had a need for it. And if that's what you want to, look at that as for marijuana, that's kind of how you have to look at it.
Going back to the whole football part of things, you've touched on it a little bit. How do you think it affects the defense? You've raised some questions about, there in fact are a lot of questions about this defense. Obviously, you have a rookie in Dayon Buchanan. If he wins the job, obviously you still have possibility of Rashad Johnson or Tony Jefferson getting that spot. You've got Minter, who has a whole one defensive snap under his belt. You have John Abraham, who's a year older. You have Alameda Teamu, who still is not on the field yet. Tyrann Matthews recovering from ACL and LCL. You have Sam Acho, Lorenzo Alexander, and Alex Okafor, who are coming back from season-ending injuries. So there are. And then you lose Karlos Dansby, and now you lose Daryl Washington. You bring in Antonio Cromartie, who has the physical characteristics, but he's also had hip issues last year. So we've got a whole bunch of question marks. If you're going to look at over the course of the season, how much you really think that Daryl Washington, not Karlos Dansby, but how much do you think that Daryl Washington's absence will affect the defense and connected to that, their playoff chances? Obviously, one player does not a team make is, if you look at it, he is perhaps one of their best playmakers. You take away playmakers, you're not as good. And when you're not as good, you take a step back. Question is, how much do you think it will affect the defense and what we will see this next season? And how do you see that affecting the playoff chances?
Well, I think it boils down to a couple things. One is, how does Todd, scheme differently now? I don't want to say he will, because I have no idea, obviously. But you have to assume he's going to use, the guys differently. You can't expect Kevin Minter and Larry Foote to be, Karlos Dansby and Daryl Washington. We saw how bad Jasper Brinkley was when he was expected to be Daryl Washington. Very good against the run, but he just wasn't good overall. So you have to wonder how he's going to scheme that. They're going to have problems, again, covering tight ends, covering backs out. They're going to have problems with the athletic quarterbacks, Russell Wilson and Colin Kaepernick. They won't have that athlete to kind of spy them. And people might say, well, that's why you drafted Deon Buchanan. You can use Buchanan that way at times, but then you have to use a different safety kind of as a single high center field type like Seattle uses Earl Thomas. That's why they're able to do so much with Cam Chancellor, not because of how good Cam Chancellor is, but because of what protection Earl Thomas provides in the background. To kind of take away that deep part of the football field. With that, do the Cardinals have that? I don't think anybody's going to argue that Rashad Johnson can do that like Earl Thomas. That's not Tony Jefferson's game. He's not a deep safety. You can look at Tyrann Matthew that way. Maybe he could have done it last year for a little bit, but it's still not playing the strength. You're not keeping him up near the line of scrimmage and using him that way. So, they don't really have a safety to do that right now. So then you have to look at how are you going to use Buchanan. If you use him in the Jeremiah Bell role, where he's, kind of a pseudo third linebacker on passing downs, we were talking about this the other day, that 2-4-5 look where they kind of roll up Jeremiah Bell into the slot or into just the linebacking core to be kind of that deep middle type of guy. Buchanan can do that, but then again the question is, who are going to be your pass coverage linebackers? Because that's what Daryl Washington was for them, is that he was the best coverage linebacker. I mean, Dansby was last year, but I'm talking about going into this year, he was their best coverage linebacker. That's not a strength of Minter. It never really has been. And then you look at Larry Foote, and again, he's not really he's kind of a two-down linebacker. They brought in Ernie Sims, more athlete than football player at this time, has never been good in coverage since he was drafted in 2007, I want to say it was, whenever Liner was drafted for that year. So, that's where my question is going to come in, is how do you scheme into your strengths now, which used to be having, that athlete in the middle. You could almost play like a pseudo-dime defense or, that nickel defense and use Dion as your second linebacker in instances and do things like that. But now you're looking at more, more question marks, and that's where the questions come. As far as the playoff situation goes, we saw last year, and really just now focuses even more, and it's going to be even more demanding. But it's going to come down to what can Carson Palmer and the offense do. Can he be good enough to get the Cardinals to the playoffs? Unfortunately, in more than 6 games, he wasn't good enough. You can even, I know they won the Seattle game. I know they won it's slipping my mind now. I think it was the Tennessee game where he didn't play overly well. But, that's what you need from him now without the turnovers. You need him to keep you in games and win games now, as opposed to your defense keeping you in games to allow Carson Palmer to win the game at the end.
And you actually brought up a point that I hadn't thought about, and I think this is – I'm going to point to the whole tight end thing. It kind of is in some ways, it's a little bit overblown. Yes, they gave up they gave a lot of reception, a lot of touchdowns to tight ends. I think if I went back to the breakdowns, that they were less about those cases. Many of them were not a case of an inability to cover them. There are a couple of plays I can think of one or two where Jeremiah Bell is right there and it's a great throw and just gets past his finger. Granted, he didn't get the good press at the line of scrimmage. He didn't bump him to kind of get him off his route. But most of the time it was blown assignments as opposed to some inability to cover, but rather being not. It was a mental mistake as the play call, missing the coverage, as opposed to somebody's coverage ability. It was more of a mental issue. So if they can work around that in year 2, I think we'll be able to minimize that to some extent. But the point that, at least in the division where I think we're going to run into problems, is against the mobile quarterback, Colin Kaepernick and Russell Wilson. Because what the Cardinals had was great speed. And we're not just talking speed. Great speed at the linebacker position, both from Washington and Dansby. And so from sideline to sideline, they are able to keep those players bottled up. And you could have, we saw it with Daryl Washington and Michael Vick. We've seen it with other mobile quarterbacks. They did a really good job of keeping things contained. I think that's the part of the football field, on the part of the defense we're going to see is they're going to struggle with more. I think that's going to, that you not to bring it up, that will be a bigger problem this year. Will be losing the edge per se on the speed. So you're going to see backfield, the running backs out of the backfield, and mobile quarterbacks are going to be the issue this year. So I still think that Todd Bowles is a strong enough schemer, and there is enough debate out there which is more important overall when it comes to football. Is it the player or is it the scheme? Scheme tends to win because you can mitigate skill depending on where the strengths and weaknesses are on the field. And if, in fact, what we learned from last year is that the defensive line played as good as it did, then we can see some of the same numbers, and they're not necessarily the same dynamics, or in terms of interceptions, things like that, as we saw last year between Washington and Dansby. But we can see the same production in terms of yardage. So I don't know if there'll be a step back so much for that. As losing Washington, I don't think it has as much of effect on the overall defensive unit as the other question marks, all the other questions that you've raised. As for chances in the playoffs, I'm going to have to go with what you said. It's less about what the defense did because the defense played well enough to be a playoff team last year, and it was the offense's struggles they had in the first half of the season. And to some extent, there were 2 games defensively that you could really point to that were issues. You could say week 1 against St. Louis, and then naturally against New Orleans, the defense just wasn't up to snuff for either of the 2 games. Or also you could look at the first Seattle game when they gave it 34 to Seattle. Defense, the offense put up, with the exception of New Orleans, put up decent amount of points. They were inconsistent about their scoring, though. So the chances of the playoffs, obviously you think, if you look at the defense as a whole, yes, that they took a step back in the defense, meaning they took a step back towards their playoff hopes. However, if the offense is where ideally it could be, and they're talking like perhaps a top-tier offense is their goal, well then, hey, you have a balanced team, which would be what you want in a football team. You talked about a little bit of schematics about the possibility of formations. Before, we actually had a question on Twitter sent to me, and I addressed a little bit from JET Arizona, Joseph T. And the question is that looking towards the future, should inside linebacker be our biggest or second biggest target in the 2015 draft, or should we give Washington another chance? I responded to him like this. Regardless of what we do with Washington, regardless with what the team decides, whether they decide to cut him or keep him and give another chance, if and when he is reinstated, because that's a whole other thing in itself, is if he's reinstated, I still think you can't say that inside linebacker is the biggest. It's one of the biggest, but whether he's back or not, you still have to look at the position because he's proven to be unreliable. I don't think it's the biggest need still. Obviously, quarterback still comes to mind. You still have – there are other key positions where you always want to be adding talent. Cornerback in this league, you have to keep adding talent there. You're going to run into – obviously some numbers games when you talk about Larry Fitzgerald, Michael Floyd, so you need to address the receiver position. You really can't ignore anything. John Abraham, so you got to get a guy off the edge from an outside linebackers. Kareem Martin looking more and more like he's going to be inside on the defensive line as opposed to rushing from the edge. So, is the biggest issue? I don't think it's the biggest or necessarily the second biggest, but I definitely think it's a target that, regardless of the situation in Washington, that the Cardinals have to address. What would you say to that?
Well, for me, I think that if it's the issue becomes what does Minter do in year one? If he's good, then obviously it's okay. You probably don't need to address it in round 1 or 2. If he's not good, and I don't even mean to say it that way, if he's a rookie, then you probably want to address it in free agency, find a veteran, younger veteran type that can do it. And like I said, you might at that point have to say, all right, well, we have to just give Daryl a chance because we don't really have a ton of options. So that's kind of, in my opinion, where it goes to at that point. Like you said, more important pressing needs are going to be outside linebacker and probably you'll want to look at maybe even quarterback. That's not to say anything about Logan Thomas or Carson Palmer, but that's always going to be, one of the top ones. And again, you can look at cornerback because, like you said, Cromartie's on a 1-year deal. Is he going to bolt? They're going to have a lot of money that they're going to have to spend on Patrick Peterson. So, maybe you just you roll the dice and franchise Peterson. Well, they won't even have to because they have their 5th-year option. But, maybe you just roll the dice and leave that 5th-year option and draft a corner and start to kind of groom him in the event that after you franchise Peterson in year 6 that he walks elsewhere because you can't come to an agreement, and then you don't necessarily want to pay him 5 years and $70 million or $75 million, whatever it's going to end up being.
So we talked about this a little bit. The last segment, we're going to deal with the thought of how the defense will actually look, personnel. Bruce Arians said, Todd, we're not going to see a significant scheme change, so it's not all of a sudden going to be a 4-3 defense, although people talk about 3-4, 4-3 hybrid. We're still going to see the same formations where we might sometimes see an outside linebacker with their hand in the door. That's just because of the type of players they are. Matt Shaughnessy is sometimes more comfortable with his hand in dirt. He's still playing outside linebacker. Kareem Martin, when he's lined out outside, will probably put his hand in dirt because that's where he's comfortable from rushing from, just from that particular technique. That's just how that's going to be. So scheme changes, we're not going to see any big difference. If he turns into who's going to get those jobs, we know it's going to be Minter on one side, assuming he is healthy. I think that the odds-on favorite, right now, it has to be Larry Foote because of his veteran experience. And assuming he's healthy, I think he's the best guy for the job as at least a two-down guy. at the Washington position. And then what I think we're going to see differently is Dansby in Washington really never left the field, hardly ever. That's one of the things is last year really the defense really didn't have a lot of moving pieces. Jeremiah Bell never left the field, played all but like 3 or 4 defensive snaps. Karlos Dansby never left the field. Patrick Peterson never left the field. They did very little rotation at certain positions. Daryl Washington, once he came back, never left the field. Even Jasper Brinkley, when he was in there, never left the field. So what I think we're going to see is a little more rotation from at least the inside linebacker position based on their skill sets. Minter might be an every down guy. I think they might like him as an every down guy. That could be. But I think what we're going to see is rather than that nickel that they would play was 2-4-5, so they'd take out Dan Williams or Alameda Teamu, and they'd go with Washington and Dansby in the middle, and then 2 guys off the edge, along with Dawkins and Calais inside, and then they'd move Matthew down, bring in the nickel corner, and then what you have is I think this year we're going to look at. Now, Arians talked a little bit about it. They call it a dollar. He said they use this formation a lot. They actually use it a lot. In fact, where they actually brought in a safety as a linebacker, they used a handful of times. It was basically one game. I can't remember which game it was. I want to say Detroit, but I'm not sure when they would.
Yeah, it was Detroit.
They brought Jeremiah Bell down into the box and brought Tony Jefferson to play deep. They did that. They did the same sort of formation. They just had their same dime, but it wasn't a safety in the box. They brought Antoine Cason in, or it was Javier Arenas they brought in at different parts of the season. Arians, you can't really believe anything he says. They did use it, but I think what we might see, as I haven't blogged about this yet, I'm going to, hopefully tonight get to it, is formations we might see. What we saw last year in those passing downs, you went with the 2 down linemen. You had 4 linebackers. So you had 2 outside, 2 inside, and then your 5 defensive backs. What we might see this year, and if we go back to 2010, the Cardinals, that was Billy Davis. Cardinals never used nickel. They never, technically what we call nickel is 5 defensive backs. I think in 5 snaps the entire season they had 5 defensive backs. They went from base to 6 defensive backs where they had an extra corner and an extra safety. That's how they rolled that year. So we've seen it before. But if we look, what we might see again this year is going to a dime package, a big nickel we call, or a dollar, and instead of what we'll see different, and this is actually a package that has me really intrigued and also almost a little bit excited about. You keep Calais and you keep Dockett there as your 2 down linemen, and then rather than going with their nickel, their dime last year, they went with 1 outside linebacker and 2 inside linebackers because they kept Washington Dansby on the field, understandably. So it was usually Abraham that they had in those situations. They had Abraham, and he had Dansby in Washington. This year, what I think will be the case, and then they had 6 defensive backs, rather than the 2 inside, 1 outside, that they will have 2 outside, have 1 inside the linebacker, whether that becomes a specialized guy, Sims in coverage, where that's mentoring coverage, or even they bring in Lorenzo Alexander as their coverage guy at linebacker, and then go with 6 defensive backs with a safety in the box, whether it be Dalen Buchanan, be it Tony Jefferson, who played that style of football back before in college. And then off the edge, you have 2 guys, and you've got Kareem Martin, and you've got Drum Abraham. That has me so excited is the possibility of seeing Martin and Abraham on both sides, on either side of the field. That would wreak havoc. It has me more excited about anything else about that possibility of a formation. But that you also get the possibility you've got 3 safeties on the field. So they've got ideally 3 safeties they feel that could be starters. I think that's what they're envisioning. I think Tony Jefferson they feel could be a starter for their team. Rashad Johnson, I think they feel is starter quality, but he's a good depth guy. And Dalen Buchanan, they drafted him to start. So even assuming Tyrann Mathieu's back, he's going to end up being the nickel corner. That's what he does best. So in any passing down, he's going to be down there instead of Gerard Powers when he's healthy. That leaves you with Johnson, Jefferson, and Buchanan to man those positions otherwise. And I really like that flexibility, at least on the coverage part, and really excited about the edge with Abraham and Martin. maybe I'm too excited about that. But do you see any? But I see that happening. And instead of going with a straight nickel, they might go with dime almost every time, and they mitigate coverage issues if Foote or Minter prove to have little issues. That go with their best coverage linebacker on those packages, and go with one inside, two on the out, go 2-3-6, then go with two guys off the edge and the two down linemen.
Yeah, and you can also look at it as almost like a not really, yeah, like a 3-3. What is that? No, like
it could be 3-3 or 3-2. Yeah.
Yeah, and go with like Martin and Calais as the ends, and then put Darnell as kind of a nose, just in pass rushing situations. You know, and like you said, you walk up Dayon in that situation because he's good in short areas, short zones. He's actually really strong in that. That's where he's best at in coverage right now, where he can kind of freelance and make plays. You can actually have him as a guy kind of playing that center field role. Maybe, you know, he'll be better in thirds and quarters than he would necessarily playing the entire field. You could even give him a half a field, you know, say whatever side Peterson's not on, you go to this side, we'll put, you know, RJ on the other side, and then you can have Tony Jefferson drop down too into that, you know, inside linebacker hybrid role and do something like that there. What Buchanan offers right now is basically a big linebacker, or, you know, a big safety that can play as an inside linebacker in you know, nickel and dime coverages or whatever they're going to call this. But he can also play a traditional, you don't want to say single high, but he can play a traditional deep safety role. And that's his strength right now in zone coverage. You don't necessarily want him manning up on tight ends in the slot, or, you know, manning up on tight ends off the line. That's not where he's gonna win. For whatever reason, when he's asked to turn and run, or, you know, work out of the back pedal, he's not nearly as fluid as he is when he's you know, seeing the field in front of him and keeping things in front of him. So that's where you want to use him now. He can definitely grow into a coverage role, but his turn and run capabilities, he's kind of got tight hips, so it's not a strength right now. It'll be something they work on as he gets comfortable, and it'll be something he'll probably develop into. But just right now, I can definitely see what you're talking about, where you have a Martin, Dockett, Campbell, and Abraham front four in any situation, and you know, that allows you flexibility to move Abraham around to either side, and then they got to figure out who they want to try to single cover. Is it going to be Calais? Is it going to be Kareem? Or is it going to be Darnell? And that really singles out, you know. And that's what Todd does the best, is he schemes matchup advantages, and that's what I expect him to do a lot this year.
All right, so end of the day, we've got final thoughts. Daryl Washington. Do you think he turns his life around? I mean, if you had to predict, kind of on his final straight, is he going to get things turned around?
You know, it just doesn't seem like, you know, you never want to say a guy is forever going to be a bad guy. And I don't even know if he's necessarily a bad guy. He just makes bad decisions. But it's been a consistently bad decision after consistently bad decision for Daryl, and I don't know if you can trust him, and that's where my concern is. I don't think you can trust him to be an integral part of your team. So I think, you know, I would say no at this point, and that's just based off, you know, his history. Do people change their lives? Yeah, but you look at a guy like Tyrann, who went to rehab, who went away from the culture that was destroying him basically at LSU to get right, and we haven't seen that from Daryl yet. That's what he's going to have to show that he's willing to do.
And that I have to agree, it's going to be a tough one. I think he'll get with it. I think eventually it'll be this year-long suspension when it comes to the money. He'll either get smarter about how he makes his bad decisions, because as you know, people say, you know, I had one colleague of mine in the media say, probably 3/4 of the guys out there in the league smoke weed. It's the dumb ones that get caught, or the ones that are in the program because they got caught. They were dumb and got caught the first time. So either he'll get better about he'll get smarter about it, or he'll figure it out at some point. But I still think he's got some good football left in him. It can't be with Arizona. Thanks for coming on, Seth. We appreciate it, as always. Again, this is Seth Cox. It's Jess Root. We've been talking Daryl Washington. This is Revenge of the Birds Radio. If you haven't yet, please visit the site, revengeofthebirds.com. We will be back with you. I think we will wait till after minicamp is over next week and talk. We'll be back in a couple of weeks where we can talk about stuff when we actually saw some football activity. Thank you, everybody, and go Cardinals.
Have a good one, Jeff.
You've been listening to Revenge of the Birds. Keep the conversation going by visiting revengeofthebirds.com. Follow us on Twitter at Revenge of Birds. You can also find us on iTunes at facebook.com/Revenge of the Birds.